Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Ginny Peterson. I'm glad to welcome you again to now our second in the series of 4 Tony Woiak Summer History Festivals at the Harbor View. And it's good to see all of you here again, familiar faces and some new faces. Tonight we're going to be hearing from a presenter who has presented many Tony Woiaks in the past, and so we look forward to that. Before we begin, I want to remember to thank always the Harbor View Restaurant. They've been really good hosts to us. Those of you that were here 2 weeks ago, we had some issue with the blinds not going all the way to the top of the windows, and that's a distraction. It was a bright sunny night like tonight, and people were bothered by looking into that brightness, and we mentioned it, and right away they fixed it up for us. They set up the chairs, you know, they do a lot for us. The one thing they couldn't do was provide one more person to work the back bar. I said, we all know our way to the front bar, so they said we'd be happy to do that. And we're going to try something that we didn't work out quite so well 2 weeks ago, but we're going to try again. Because we've got all our new equipment set up here, and we don't want anybody to trip over wires, and you know, it's a safety issue, and it's also, we don't want to damage anything. So when the presenter is finished, if you have additional questions, or if you want to maybe mention to him something that you remember from Washburn that he might have made mention or something like that, he will be going to the back of the room at the end, at the very end, after we've all said thank you with our applause. So if you want to hang out a little bit and ask more questions, that's the place, not coming forward this way. And that'll keep everybody. And plus we've got a crew of people that are our own setup and put all this together and take it all back down again. So we want to make sure we can get that job done. So just a reminder, we'll try that again this week. Let's see, did I forget anybody? I forgot you. We were thanking the Harbor Table, but of course we want to thank you for keep returning to our presentations, because you're what makes it what it is. You are the spark that makes this all fun. It's fun to listen to all the little side conversations that are going on before and after, and sometimes during. So let me read what was our presenter gave to me, so I can give you the full lowdown on him. Pete Mann. Although Pete's professional career has been in the fields of environmental science and public administration, he delights in the exploration of place, including about why communities are the way they are. He has been fascinated with the heritage of the region ever since he first set foot on the shores of the Washburn Bay as youth. And since his retirement from the position of Ashland City Administrator in 2015, Pete has had the opportunity to spend more of his time investigating aspects of this region's community history. Pete resides in Ashland with his spouse Diana, and when not traveling to visit his grandkids, he delights in becoming further acquainted with the area's foundations. So we appreciate having him tonight, and we appreciate his enthusiasm for history and for place. And let's welcome Pete Mann.
Thank you. I trust everybody can hear me because we tried out the sound before you arrived. And with the new sound system here, you won't have my spouse throwing shoes at me asking me to speak up. This presentation started out as a research on the incorporation of Ashland as a city. It's an interesting story that I hope to present in the future, but while I was researching aspects of that, I thought it was interesting to provide some of the information I found on what Washburn and the area was like 120 some years ago. And so this is the news of Washburn as reported in the Washburn Times. In 1900, Washburn was going through a transition. It had become a mature community. The boomtown aspects of Washburn were disappearing. The population of the urban core of this town was estimated to be about 5,000 people. It's much less than that today. And the cutover area, the rural area, was estimated to be almost 2,000 folks living there. The industrial base of the community was in decline. The newspapers were evolving, and the town was truly in transition. So let's take a stroll through the Washburn Times, one of two newspapers that were in town at the time. The Times was an 8-page newspaper. It had evolved quite a bit over the last 20 years from a paper of just pages of run-on sentences and paragraphs reporting the news to actually coalescing around stories with headlines. And in this particular copy of the Times from June 4th, 1903, it noted on the front page an important town meeting to discuss matters of community importance and particularly related to the Bigelow sawmill. By 1903, the town of Washburn had the highest valuation in the county as far as property valuations were concerned. It was 24% of the total county valuation. And though you see this number here of 22.1 million, it's kind of an error. It should be 3.1 million as shown in this upper part of the table. But even with the highest valuation in the county, collecting monies to operate town government was a concern. And Bigelow wasn't necessarily paying what the town thought it should be paying in taxes. The Bigelow mill was sold the year before this paper came out to the Edward Hines Lumber Company. But Bigelow was still logging in the western parts of the township. And so the town treasurer and the town clerk traveled out to a location known as Benton in the western part of the township via the Northern Pacific Railroad, the former Battle Axe Railroad. And they skied 6 miles into the woods to a Bigelow log landing. The paper called it the 6-mile jaunt treacherous, for the purpose of seizing 900,000 feet of logs that Bigelow had cut in the woods and had stacked there. And they were to be offered at a tax sale to recover some $4,288 in taxes owed by Bigelow. After Edward Hines bought the mill, Hines owned a mill in Ashland, he owned a mill in Mason, another one in Iron River, and he played games with the taxes in the township and in the county. He moved his finished lumber products from mill to mill so he could take advantage of the lowest tax rate around, as well as logs that were cut for milling at his mills. It was a pretty extensive game the mills played to avoid paying their fair share of personal property taxes. They also commented in this news article about a dispute over the naming of the fire chief. An audience was also given to some of the members of the fire department who protested against the action of the board in naming Mr. Bosalai, chief of the department, chief of the fire department, and cow police. They seemed to think that the dignity of the department was being lowered. And cows were a problem in town, and the paper railed against the local town government for not doing anything about it. Our good friends, the cows, are beginning to assert themselves again, and their contented faces are seen quite frequently upon our streets and in our gardens. Is there no hope for anyone but the cow? This was one of the more tame comments that the paper made about cows wandering around in town. The paper really did a lot to boost the community. The paper had a lot of comments promoting the community and touting the benefits of Washburn as a town to call home. But it also criticized when it thought it was necessary. In this case, It's noting it costs the town hundreds of dollars to clean up after these bovines every year. It costs more still to repair broken sidewalks. Sidewalks were wooden yet, remember. The curse of making a cow yard of Washburn will soon smell to heaven, and all for the lack of a little backbone in the handling of the question. So the end result was that the town passed an ordinance prohibiting cows from wandering in town and permitting people to take their cows from their homes to a rural pasture between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning and return them home between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. They also prohibited slaughtering of animals in town. That was another health problem that the Board of Health tried to deal with. And then there was the perennial problem of the road to Ashland. The road to Ashland in 1900 was a road that went to Ashland Junction and then followed the Omaha grade back into Ashland through the sloughs of Fish Creek. It wasn't Highway 137 that we know today. And there was a problem with keeping the road maintained. There was an effort to build another road to Ashland across the sandbarn where Highway 2 is today. But Ashland and Washburn were constantly fighting about who was to pay for the maintenance and construction of that road and who would maintain the bridges across Fish Creek, the long bridge and the short bridge. Lars Larson in his book notes that after Ashland's version of the battle axe was abandoned, that the railroad trestles along the lakefront were actually used for the Ashland Road to bridge Fish Creek. And it also notes that the courts were busy in Washburn. In this case, Paul Reno was charged with a heinous offense, but he didn't feel it was necessary to appear in court, and so a bondsman went after him and delivered him back to the court. Now he's waiting trial in jail, but paper doesn't at all say what this heinous crime was that Mr. Reno committed. Other front page news included the latest performances at the Opera House, the results of school board elections, and of course advertising. And it even announced a 24-page upcoming edition of the Times that was going to be a booster edition for the community. And if you have the problem or the opportunity to go online on the Library of Congress website and read that 24-page booster edition, it really is a pretty good summary of what Washburn was like in the year 1903 and the amenities of the community. The advertising in the paper took many forms: display ads, directories, news inserts. These were sentences or paragraphs that were inserted within news articles in the paper. And there were some companies that actually had a pretty good advertising program. And one of them was Calumet Baking Powder, which really came up with a series of advertisements that appeared in the paper with a Native American theme promoting the product. Calumet Baking Powder is still around today. It's manufactured by Kraft Nabisco. And then, of course, Ben Ungruch had his hardware store. And he took out a lot of display ads in the paper. In this case, advertising his New England sewing machines, majestic cooking stoves, wood stoves. And he had promotional exhibits in his store where there were cooking demonstrations and everything else. And he even had some of these news article inserts in the paper. In this case, save fuel by putting storm sashes on your house. They'll pay for themselves within one season. And he also sold farm machinery at the time. I haven't found, at least in the city directory, any implement dealers in Washburn, but Ben Ungruch apparently sold farm machinery out of his hardware store. This is a photograph of Ben's hardware store. You can see all the majestic cooking stoves lined up in the store. And then we had official directories in the paper, which are kind of nice if you want to try to figure out who was in public office at the time. And another unique thing about the paper is it often referred to Washburn as a city. Washburn was a township at this time. Again, we talk about city officers in the directory, even though we refer to the head of the local unit of the government as a chairman, as you would in a township government. And we had church directors in town. And I don't know if this is a true grouping of all the churches in Washburn in that time, or just the churches that perhaps paid for advertising by having themselves listed in this directory. And then we had transportation timetables. I had always thought that a rural community like Washburn was somewhat isolated from the rest of the world. And clearly that was not true for this community. There were 4 trains every day to Ashland, 4 trains to return, 3 trains on Sunday. Even the Northern Pacific, the Battle Axe, had 2 trains daily to and from Iron River. And then we had the maritime schedule. There were 12 sailings Monday through Saturday to Ashland, and 6 sailings on Sunday. And the arrivals and departures were from the city dock at the foot of Washington Avenue, and some of the sailings even stopped at the lumber docks to pick up and deliver employees from the mills. The Chequamegon Bay Transportation Company operated 4 steamers. The steamer Mary Scott, the steamer Lucille. They had just commissioned in 1903 the steamer Chequamegon, and they also had just purchased the skater. Again, the city dock in Washburn, you can see remnants along the lakefront today, was at the foot of Washington Avenue. And in this 1938 aerial photograph, you can see where the dock is still protruding out into the bay. In Ashland, they docked at the Chequamegon Hotel dock. And this was the original Chequamegon Hotel, not today's Chequamegon Hotel. The original hotel was built on the site of the county courthouse. The Chequamegon Bay dock, or the hotel dock, was directly north of the courthouse. And you can see from this photograph that the bay has not been filled in underneath the railroad tracks that were down there at one time yet. The long, agonizing saga of the Battle Axe came to an end in 1902. If you recall, the Battle Axe was the Washburn-Bayfield-Iron River Railroad that was built with county bonds between Washburn and Iron River up through the woods, kind of on the right-of-way of aligning with Wanaboo Road for part of its distance. And after the legal morass of the failure of the Battle Axe was over, the Northern Pacific bought the rail line. And the Northern Pacific had big plans for Washburn, at least according to the Washburn Times. Bigelow, before he sold his bill, had granted the Northern Pacific some 500-600 feet of water frontage east of their sawmill for the Northern Pacific to build a dock complex. The Northern Pacific announced in the paper that they were going to build a new yard along Omaha Avenue west of about 5th or 6th Avenue. Although the lands were platted for Omaha Avenue in that location, the street was not yet open. And the Northern Pacific was going to use that for a railroad yard. And they also proposed a new depot in downtown Washington. Unfortunately, none of that came about. The Northern Pacific did invest in the Battle Axe. If you look at the authorizations for expenditures from the Northern Pacific Historical Society in Minneapolis, it does show significant expenditures to upgrade the line, but they never came about with their big plans for the city of Washburn. The paper also announced an annual Farmers Institute. The cutover was being settled. And so the University of Wisconsin started having Farmers Institutes around the state where they could help educate some of the people that settled in the cutover on how to make a living in those locations. And this big display ad from the Times shows the Institute for June 16th of 1903. And then we had the local news columns. This was the gossip columns of the newspaper. And in this particular one, you see that there is a story about a store that was burglarized. The pupils of Washburn High School are making efforts to complete their graduating exercises, superior, et cetera, et cetera. But what I found was unique about this was this little article down here that said the botany class of Ashland High School spent Monday in the vicinity of Houghton Falls. They actually had field trips from Ashland all the way up the peninsula here to study the flora and fauna of a place like the Dells and Houghton Falls. The local news continued with Judge Ben Smith taking a trip to Europe. Thompson Lumber Company mills closed down because there was a shortage of logs. Denison Town was available to do first-class work. Somebody wanted to buy some acreage in the cutover. And S. Perlman has been making some very noticeable improvements to the interior of the store. But I don't have any idea what Mr. Perlman sold or where his store was located. And then we have government meeting notices and legal notices. In the town board proceedings, it was interesting that the town board didn't meet till 8 o'clock in the evening. If you can imagine going to a government meeting that starts at 8 o'clock. Maybe they transacted their business a little quicker than what I remember government meetings. But they had several funds that were reported in the news as well. And this is the general fund noting the major employees of the community. And the highest paid employee was the city clerk, Mr. Harry, for $37 a month. The police chief got a whole $35 a month. And there were various other expenditures that were part of the general fund as well. Apparently, Washburn did not have its own team of horses for hauling its hook and ladder truck. And it used one of the stables in town to haul the hook and ladder truck to a fire when it was needed. And for that, the Posey and Company earned $1 in this particular month. And then C.M. Kramer and Company earned $1 for hauling Jay to jail. I have no idea what that's about. But then we had a judgment against the city, which was the largest expenditure on this particular general fund for this month. And Alex McQuillan received a judgment against the town for $38.25. And again, the paper does not identify what that judgment was. But the city also, the town also had a poor fund and gave a public assistance to various members of the community. In this case, it appears that all the assistants were women, which makes me wonder if they were widows or not. It also provided medical care for these individuals with reimbursement of doctors, transportation to Ashland to the hospital, and so forth. And here we have a rent that was given to Mrs. Nichols in addition to the assistance she got up here, as well as a grocery bill for Mrs. Nichols. And then we have a highway fund. Now remember, the town of Washburn was a large area. It included all of the town of Washburn today. It included the city, it included the town of Barksdale, Eileen, Pilsen, and Keystone, and parts of the town of Bayview. And so the highway fund was a big thing. In this case, we have about 15, I keep pushing the wrong button, I'm sorry. We have about 15 employees that work for the city and the street department. It turns out that renting a team to work in the street department of public streets earned a whole lot more than an employee working in the street department. But in addition to employees, we had what appeared to be a whole bunch of contract employees that were working on the city dock and roads outside of town, primarily the Ashland Road and the Wannabe Road. A lot of work was going on. And then the paper was filled with what I refer to as snake oil ads. Frost and Spees and Fox Brothers pharmacies, call them pharmacies, seem to be the biggest advertisers of snake oil ads. They came in all forms, display ads, news inserts, as well as testimonials from people that use various products to fix their medical woes or health woes. And if you think that was something that's been in the past, we have snake oil ads today, as anybody who watches cable channels know. But then in April 1901, an article appeared in the Times that showed that a woodsman was found on the Battle Axe. It was a guy by the name of Canton from Marina, Wisconsin, and he was taken to the Ashland Hospital after he overdosed on the woodman's favorite beverage, Hinckley's bone liniment. Unfortunately, he did not survive and is buried in the city cemetery. Of course, alcohol was not permitted in the logging camps, and so employees of the logging camps used various other forms of relaxation, or one apparently was using Hinckley's bone liniment. But even the ad says it's for internal and external use. Unfortunately, Mr. Canton drank a little too much of it. And then we have the dollar store in Washburn. And if you think this is a new phenomenon, think again, because in 1900 you had a 99-cent store. Washburn was a union town. We had the Lumber Shovers Union, the Knights of Labor, Northern Wisconsin Millmen's Skilled Labor Association, the Railroad Brotherhoods, and even some retail clerks in town were organized. The first strike in Washburn was in 1886 after the Omaha elevator opened, and it wasn't open for more than a month when the employees of the elevator went on strike. There are strikes over the early history of the town, related to wages, work hours, as well as working conditions, the same things that you see today when labor gets a little agitated. In 1903, logging camp wages were listed in the Times as you see on the screen. The paper noted that labor was plentiful that particular year. There was no particular scarcity in finding employees in the logging camps, and it refers to these wages as good wages. The highest paid folks in the lumber camp, of course, were the foreman, the blacksmith, and the cooks. The lumber shovers, the stevedores that worked the docks in Washburn, didn't get paid a monthly wage. They got paid 55 cents an hour. And assuming that a lumber shover was working 12 hours a day for 6 days a week, that's a wage that would come out to more than $184 a month. But remember, before you take that to heart, that ships weren't always at dock in Washburn. These were intermittent hours that lumber shovers worked. And so they may not have earned $184 a month in their efforts. And then we had the Businessmen's Protective Association that arose in town. And the purpose of this association was to protect the merchants from deadbeats. Apparently folks would run up credit in one store, and when they couldn't get any more credit, they'd go to another store. And so the Protective Association attempted to try to prevent that from happening. They also organized to provide for early store closings in Washburn. By early store closings, they meant 8 p.m. closings of retail establishments. Unfortunately, they weren't successful. They couldn't get all the merchants in town to agree. But men weren't the only people who organized the town. Women organized as well. And Washburn had a very active women's Christian temperance union in the early 1900s. They met weekly. They organized a loyal temperance legion for the youth of the community. And the youth were encouraged to abstain from alcohol and profanity by joining the legion. And they even invited state and national movement leaders to our community who actually spoke to the local temperance movement. And there was good reason for the women to organize into the temperance movement, because in 1902, Washburn had 28 saloons. In the catacombs of the museum, when I was in the basement with the museum archivist, Susan McGrath, I came across this particular drawing. I don't know its date, but it has 33 saloons listed on it in Washburn's early days. And these 33 saloons were grouped between 1st Avenue East all the way to 8th Avenue West. Of course, Legion Park is up by 1st Avenue East. The Time Out Restaurant, City Hall is right about there. The IGA store is here now. And the Holiday Station is in this vicinity. And gambling was rampant in town. But even soda fountains needed a government liquor license, according to this article in the Times. Apparently, soda fountains sold something called cherry flips and sticks. And I don't know what they are, but apparently they contained alcohol. Washburn had a brewery. The brewery was located where the high school is today. And before Prohibition, regional and national brewers had a great deal of influence in the product that local saloons sold, even though there may have been local breweries in town. The larger breweries in the country financially supported local saloons. They provided financial support, they provided building rents for local operators, they often furnished a local saloon, and so local saloon operators were kind of obligated to purchase the products of the major breweries. In the case of Washburn, Schlitz was a dominant factor in the beverages that were served in our saloons. Schlitz actually owned 3 saloons in Washburn at the time. Schlitz bought the Washburn Brewery in 1903. But it was kind of interesting reading the thread in the paper because Schlitz didn't buy the building, Schlitz bought the business. And it turns out that some guy in Ashland had a very large interest in that building. And after Schlitz bought the brewery and closed down the brewing of the local beverage, this guy from Ashland reopened the brewery and started brewing another beverage in it. And it resulted in several years of litigation before Schlitz finally won and the brewery was closed down for good. And as I mentioned, gambling was a problem in town. Slot machines, roulette wheels, craps, card games, you name it. And the paper, again, went on a tear with local government on not doing anything about the widespread gambling that was undertaken in town. And the town government pretty much ignored it until the pressure got too great and they finally told the police department to stop it. But the police department didn't follow the town board's orders or directives. So on September 8, 1903, the clerk was upon motion instructed to serve the following notice on the chief of police of patrolman in town. Whereas this board has twice ordered all gambling stopped in Washburn, and whereas notwithstanding such orders, it is reported on good authority that crap tables, wheel of fortune, and other gambling devices are allowed to operate in the back rooms of saloons in this city. You are notified to see to it that all devices of a gambling nature are forthwith removed from said back rooms and that they will not be operated in any way, shape, or manner. You are notified that you will be held responsible for carrying out this order and that your failure to do so will operate to create a vacancy in the police department of the town. It turns out that it was successful because in the following month, the paper reported that gambling had ceased in town. In 1903, Washburn had 2 telephone companies. Wisconsin Telephone was the old established company, but a new company called Bayfield County Telephone had come to town. The paper was full of little notes showing everybody that subscribed to the new company and what their phone numbers were. It even reported every time Bayfield County Telephone dug a new hole for a pole along Highway 13 going up to Bayfield. The paper also notes this company or this thing called Home Telephone Company. And I don't know if that was just another name for Bayfield County Telephone or if that was a third company that was interested in the community. Washburn had two ice companies, Chequamegon Ice Company and the Washburn Ice Company. Washburn Ice Company started when it thought that Chequamegon Ice Company was gouging patrons in town for the price of ice. We had an electric company back then, and we had the waterworks that was built after the great 1888 fire. The electric company had a lot of ads showing the benefits of electricity, no delay, no waiting, you don't have to hunt up a match to turn on the light in your house. The electric company also charged for streetlights. In the case, I'm assuming this is streetlights because the article isn't really clear. It appears that Washburn was paying $12 a month per light for electric lights. And like as I said, I'm assuming that was a street light. Yet Ironwood is paying $7.20 a month per light, and they wanted the price reduced to $7. Well, this got the paper riled up, and the paper advocated for demanding that the charges be lowered in Washburn, whereupon the electric company threw up its arms and offered to sell the electric company to the city for $35,000. Washburn didn't take them up on that. I thought that this was a little curious. The electric company offered half-night rates to the citizens of our community. Apparently there weren't electric meters. Apparently the company didn't want to produce electricity during the night if it didn't have to. So it offered a half-night rate, which started from 7 a.m. to closing downtime. I don't know when closing downtime was. The paper doesn't mention it. But if you turned on a light out at 1 a.m., you didn't get electricity. Wolves, as some people regard them today, was a problem in 1903. People complained of the scarcity of deer. Even though a $10 bounty was offered for wolves back then, the paper advocated that the bounty should be raised to $25. And the Washburn Cultural Center was, of course, built and standing at the time. And sometimes when you do research on a project, it creates more questions than it answers. And one day I was down in the catacombs of this business building with Susan McGruff, and I came across this odd vault down in the basement. And I scratched my head and I tried to figure out what it was. And what's curious about this vault, I mean, every bank has a vault, but what's curious about this vault is it says town clerk on it. Now, the town offices were where the DNR building is today. That building was built, I think, in 1887. And I had always thought that town offices stayed in that building until they moved to the old library building, which is the current city hall. But apparently there was an intermediary step where town offices moved in to the old bank building, which is now the cultural center. And the clerk had a vault down there. What gives a little bit more credence to this theory is that the paper shows an advertisement for the sale of the town hall building. But then again, as much as the paper goes on tirades about things it doesn't like happening in the community, it also praises the community as well. In this particular article, it described Washburn as a community of people who own their own homes. They are comfortable, desirable homes. Most property owners exhibit tender care of their homes. Washburn has few wealthy families that call this community their home, and the town is mostly made up of laboring men and professionals of moderate circumstances, and bragged that home ownership in Washburn exceeded 85%. But Washburn was not crime-free. Pickpockets were a tremendous problem in town, at least if you read the paper. Youngsters were often unruly. It's one of the reasons this town created a library to try to tame unruly kids. But reform school sentencing was frequent of unruly kids in our community. Theft and larceny was an ongoing issue. Break-ins were frequent. Shackers were a challenge. The paper calls some visitors unsavory characters, and there were visiting crime waves of minstrel groups and groups like we're here. Shackers were people that broke into vacant lumber camps or logging camps and cabins out in the hinterlands. Some of the interesting articles about problems in town included this one related to a firecracker. Somebody in town tied a firecracker to a dog's tail. Unfortunately, the dog lost his entire tail and lost a portion of his ear, and the paper was really bent out of shape about it. There were jailbreaks and attempted jailbreaks. In this particular article, I think I just disturbed the mic here. In this particular article, an undersheriff, Jared Welton, was returning home from a New Year's Eve celebration. He walked by the jail, and he said something looked really weird in one of the jail windows. And it turns out it was because some of the prisoners were trying to saw their way through the bars. And then there were some real interesting articles in the paper. And this one relates to the Bayfield police chief, Henry J. Conlon, who was down here to acquire a marriage license for a young man who he deemed that it was the best way out of trouble that he was in. And he commented further that the Harbor City must insist that each and every man who is at all under suspicion in town during hunting season must have a license. Foul language was a problem back then, and people were sentenced to 30 days of county jail for obscene or foul language, and it's really too bad we don't do that today. And then there was the article about the gentleman who was picked up for alienation of another man's wife. And as the article says, as it seemed to be a case of, he did not appear when his case was called in the local courts. And the authorities felt that it seemed to be a case of good riddance. The officers had not wasted very much time in pursuing the fugitive, and the last of him about here has been very likely seen. And then, of course, we have Mr. A.C. Probert, who just can't seem to be out of trouble even when he's out of town. And the paper noted that his bank in Eau Claire, Michigan closed after there was a run on the bank, and it editorialized that Mr. Probert has certainly had lots of experience as a banker, and it ought to be that by this time that he would know how to keep his doors open. And then there was the tragedy of the Sioux River murder. And this is probably the worst crime that I read in the early parts of the last century. There was a boarding house up in the Sioux River, which I'm assume is associated with the logging that was going on up there. And two masked men entered the boarding house to rob the people that were there. In the process, they murdered an 18-year-old Bayfield man, Mr. Willie Ernst. And they timed their robbery for the arrival of the evening southbound train. And so they escaped on the evening train, went to Ashland and Iron River. They were apprehended in Iron River, but curiously, they were released after apprehension. They were captured again. I don't remember if it was at Ashland or another location, and they were released once again. I don't know how this story turns out because I have not researched far enough into the future to understand whether anybody was prosecuted for the crime of murder or not. And then the town, Bayfield County operated a prisoner labor camp in the early 1900s. And perhaps with some of the altruistic spirit that the community has developed over the decades, the town board went on record opposing the labor camp. And in the resolution opposing the labor camp, it acknowledged that the town board really couldn't control what county government did. But we demand that not a cent of Washburn town taxes go to pay for the operation of the labor camp. I don't know when the county closed its camp, but it was an interesting situation. And I didn't realize it back then, but apparently county circuit courts could admit new immigrants as citizens. And here are the new citizens that were granted citizenship in the Bayfield County Circuit Court in the early 1900s. Settling of the cutover was a big thing. There were numerous advertisements in the paper for lands that were for sale for reasonable prices. I don't know what those reasonable prices were. They offered terms, 1/5 cash, balance of 1, 2, or 3 or 4 years. And if you're complaining about home ownership interest today, they charged 7% back in 1900. Not only were advertisements appearing in the Times for sale of cutover, but the paper also noted people that settled the cutover. In this case, a Mr. Hammond from Chicago bought 80 acres a half mile above the town, and he's moving his home there. And another gentleman, Jacob Streaker from Nebraska, was bringing all his household goods with him, and he was settling an area called the Rye Fields, which I'm not sure where that is located. The town of Washburn had a school system, as you are aware. In the March 1903 annual meeting, the school board reported that there were, within the village, there was an enrollment of 924 kids in the school. The parochial school enrollment was 310. I don't know if Washburn had only one parochial school at the time, St. Louis, or whether we had more than one. The rural school enrollment was 256 and high school enrollment was 77. The paper took exception to the school board's report and said, no, you may claim that there are this many people enrolled in school, but attendance is quite a bit worse. And the paper reported that attendance was only 692 in the public schools, parochial school was 200, high school attendance was 66, and there was a manual training department in that Walker High School at the time, and there was, according to the paper, there were 90 folks enrolled in the manual training department. The paper concluded that there were 639 truants in the township. The cost to educate a graded school child in the town at that time was $17 for a village school and $35 for a rural school. And the manual training department cost was quite a bit more than $50. The school board also was busily constructing new schools for the influx of new kids into the district. In July of 1903, it ordered 3 new schools. The Setsky School, I'm not sure where this school was, or any of these rural schools for that matter. The Sioux River Country School, as well as a monk school in a temporary building. In the fall of 1903, the paper announced that the village schools had between 4 and 5 teachers in each. The manual training department had 1 teacher, and there were 13 rural schools in the district, all with 1 teacher. The paper also noted that the schools were heated with wood, and curiously, it didn't ask for bids at all for heating the rural schools, but it sought bids for heating the urban schools. And they left the Pioneer School out of this particular bid acquisition. But it cost, or I should say, it took 325 cords of wood to heat the Walker High School, the Lincoln and Garfield grade schools. And the paper only wanted green birch, maple, and hemlock, which I found to be curious. Perhaps buying green wood was cheaper than buying dry wood. But I would have thought with the creosote buildup and whatnot that you would get from green wood would affect, or you'd be worried about in the school buildings. I'm not sure what ever caused the Walker High School to burn but after reading this, I wondered if it was creosote buildup. In 1900, Washburn experienced a diphtheria epidemic. All the public and private parochial schools were closed within the village. The rural schools were kept open. Public library was closed. All meetings, gatherings, and church services were discontinued, and parents were encouraged to keep their children at home. I haven't read any place in the paper how many deaths occurred in the town as a result of the epidemic. And the following year, the paper reported that smallpox was running wild. The State Board of Health suggested that Washburn had experienced a higher rate of smallpox than any other community of its size in the state, and it blamed the outbreak from the logging camps, resulting in a public outcry in town demanding that the logging camps be burned to eradicate smallpox from the area. The Times sarcastically disagreed with that opinion and saw no reason why the camps couldn't be fumigated rather than destroyed. The fire department got a brand new electric alarm system in 1903. They had little boxes on poles, you know, where you pull the tab and it sends an alarm to the fire department. It resulted in many false alarms that were reported in the paper. And so the town adopted an ordinance to harshly penalize those that turned in a false alarm. But the alarm system had another problem. It didn't tell anybody where the fire was. If you pulled an alarm up by, let's say, where the old hospital was, the alarm was triggered in all the hose houses in town, but it didn't tell you where you should respond to. And so after having confusion for a while about where firefighters should go to protect the community, in 1903 the town board voted again to remove the alarm system and go back to coded whistles. The town certainly had a lot of recreation and entertainment back then if you had the time and the money to undertake the activities. We had 3 bowling alleys in the early 1900s, and we had 8 bowling leagues in town. We had celebrations, Labor Day celebrations, where unions would come and march in a parade from as far away as Superior and Ironwood. We had special occasions and parades when we had a Wild West show visiting town or a circus visiting town. And the 4th of July was probably the biggest event of the year, where they had a lot of oratory and activities that went on. Grease pole, grease pig, a gun club shoot, baseball at the athletic park, and of course various races. It was kind of interesting that a company called C.M. Kramer had a float in the parade, and as we do today where we throw candy out from the float, apparently C.M. Kramer threw a lot of things from its float that made many boys, small boys made happy with many of the large boys received pleasing surprises and packages they picked up. But C.M. Kramer also had a grocery delivery route, and it put an advertisement in the paper that said, if you're on our delivery route, we're going to give you your delivery along the parade route. And so be aware when we start throwing 49-pound sacks of flour off the float, be prepared to catch it. We had 3 baseball teams in town. The Washburn Athletics, which was a semi-pro team, another team called the Washburn Columbian Guards, and of course the high school had its baseball team. The Washburn played a lot of games against surrounding communities. In this case, they played the Odena Redskins. How about that for an appropriate team name in this day and age? Unfortunately, Odena beat Washburn in this particular game. What was interesting is that when Washburn High School played other high schools, the games were somewhat dictated by train schedules. In this case, they only got to the 6th inning. And I remember had to leave on the 3 o'clock train, so the game was called. Washburn also had a football team. And yeah, it's interesting scoring back then. Circus came to town once a year. This 1903, I believe, the paper reported that the crowd was orderly, the show was free from fake and skin games, and authorities took precautions to prevent any crooked work. And despite that, several members of the troupe were picked up. They had a little difficulty with the police, and they spent a few hours in the city lockup, but the management of the circus managed to free them, and the affair amounted to nothing, according to the paper, but doesn't really describe what the affair was. And some equipment got damaged from time to time. In this case, a wagon of the circus troupe had several gallons of gasoline in it that apparently were used for lighting purposes, and it caught fire, and the wagon burned, resulting in a $3,000 loss to the troupe. We also had a Wild West show in town. This was a Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. Ashland was lucky enough to get that show, I think, in 1899. But this was the Luella Four-Paw Fish Wild West show. The paper says, "Don't miss the strange and peculiar free exhibition. It is not a display of cheap finery, tawdry tinsel, or decrepit caged animals, but a vast assemblage of master horsemen of the world." And the Opera House was busy. It had dances, lectures, concerts, theater companies, Broadway productions, exhibit hall. It was used as an exhibit hall when vendors would come to town to sell their wares, and many community activities and local productions in it. The paper regularly had a listing of coming events at the Opera House, and as you can see from this, it was a pretty busy place in the summer months. Even Uncle Tom's Cabin, with $20,000 production, came to town, complete with orchestras, 2 brass bands, 50 people. Don't miss it. And then they had a group that the Mahara Brothers Traveling Minstrels, which came to town in their own $30,000 palace car. Bicycles were the rage. There was a lot of articles about biking, and the Times was advocating for a bike trail between Washburn and Ashland in 1902. So if anybody here is from the North Coast Cycling Association, do you think we can get it done? Washburn had a choral club back then. A director from Ashland would come over to direct the group. I don't know if he was associated with the college or not. Today, we have the, okay. We have the Shawamigan Choir. And all of a sudden, my thing doesn't want to work. But big things were happening in the town as well. And in February of 1903, the headline of the paper notified the residents of the community that we were being gifted $15,000 for a new Carnegie Library. But not only that, the secretive activities that were going on down at Barksdale were finally revealed. The Atlantic Manufacturing Company turned out to be a dynamite manufacturing concern that we knew as DuPont. And they announced that they were going to build a plant down the bay. The $1 million plant turned into a $500,000 plant by July of 1903. And with 43 buildings to be erected on the site, the manufactured dynamite and other explosives of all kinds of descriptions. And unfortunately, the first deaths that happened at the plant occurred before the plant was even constructed. There are 2 folks that died on the property clearing stumps for the building of the plant from a dynamite explosion. And there were NIMBYs back then as well. The paper says that Yango farmers who were first considerably opposed to the new dynamite plant are ready to acknowledge that the market it already gives them for butter, eggs, and vegetables is the very best. People in town are beginning to wonder whether our dynamite people are not eating up all the produce and products, as fresh farm stuff is hard to get. And the paper notified or published an editorial saying that we need a stump crusade for Washburn. If the new dynamite factory goes in down the Bay Shore this summer, we would suggest that the first carload of the explosive manufactured be brought into town and purchased by the town government and used for blowing out the stumps that greet the eye of the visitor coming to the city. Why not have a stump crusade? Well, that's it for my story from the 1930s. To answer them. I think Susan McGrath, the archivist of the Washburn Museum, and Linda Millstadt and Pamela Eckhorn from the Wisconsin Historical Society and the Great Lakes Visitor Center for their assistance in putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. As Pete said, he'd be happy to stick around a little bit tonight and just mingle at the back of the room so we can get started at the front. But I'd like to thank you all again for coming in and appreciate your loyalty and your enthusiasm. Thank you.